Beau Hatcher had been awake since 3, and the reason he had been awake since 3 was standing 40 feet away at the north fence with a cleaning rod in her hand and no expression on her face at all. The north fence at Camp Ardent was where the cattle chutes were. The place had been a stockyard before it was anything else, a railhead on the dry steppe where men used to load sheep and beef onto flat cars, and the task force had inherited the pens and the loading chute and the smell of 40 years of animals baked into the boards. The section used the chute rail as a shooting bench. It was the only thing on the whole camp that did not move. "Merrick," Hatcher said, loud, because there were 9 men drinking coffee behind him, and volume was most of his job. "Cold bore, 700. Aiden's gun, not yours." That was the part that should have landed. A shooter's rifle is a shooter's rifle. Handing her somebody else's in front of the section, first light, 1 round, no warmer, was the kind of thing you did to a kid you wanted to watch fold. Faye Merrick set the rod down on the rail. She was 29 and had the sort of face that got her carded on leave and called sweetheart by strangers, and men had been deciding things about her from 10 feet away her entire adult life. She picked up the borrowed rifle, checked the bolt, and looked at the scope turrets the way a person reads a bus schedule in a city they already know. "What's it zeroed to?" "Whatever's on it." "Okay," she said. That was all. No jaw set, no chin up, nothing he could push against. She lay down on the boards in the smell of old sheep and settled behind glass that wasn't hers. And Hatcher felt the thing move in his chest that he had been refusing to name since March. "Thursday," she'd said 2 days ago in front of him. "They'll take the Moran run at the scale house, and it'll be the day nobody's expecting it." Nobody had written it down. If you're still with me, take a second and subscribe, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I read them. Before we're done, you'll be standing in a hot hangar watching a rear admiral turn a small silver pin over in his fingers and read a number somebody scratched into the back of it with a nail. And before that, you'll be on a rail embankment in the middle of the afternoon while this woman gives a sealed steel grain bin a mouth to breathe through, 1 shot at a time, with 10 people's lives sitting under it. Stay to the end. The steel plate at 700 meters rang like a dropped pan, and the sound came back across the flats about 2 seconds later. And one of the men behind Hatcher said, quietly, the way you do when you have lost a small bet you never announced. Faye cleared the borrowed rifle, set it on the rail muzzle safe, and went to get coffee. Her mother had a ranch on the dry side of a state where the wind came out of the west every afternoon at 3 like a shift change, and the ranch had 800 ewes and 1 steel grain bin the color of a nickel. Nell Merrick had put a rifle in her daughter's hands at 11 years old and had never once been proud of it. "You're not killing anything," Nell said that first evening, both of them on their bellies on the packed dirt of the lambing ground with the light going orange behind the shelter belt. "You're keeping something alive. Different job. Don't get them mixed up." The coyotes came off the ridge at dusk in 2s, and they were smarter than anything Faye ever met later. You did not get a second look at a coyote. You got 1 look, at distance, in bad light, with the wind confused by the belt of Russian olive her grandfather had planted, and either you had already thought about the wind, or you had not. The bin was the other lesson. She was 14, and they were emptying it in October, and the auger was running, and the sound had changed, gone deeper, gone wrong, and her mother had shut it down, and stood there with her hands on her hips, looking up at the 60 feet of corrugated steel like it had spoken to her. "Vents plugged," Nell said. "Birds." So nothing comes out of a shut box for free, Faye." Her mother took her jaw and turned her head so she was looking at the top of the bin, at the little goosenecks against the sky. "Grain leaves the bottom. Air has to come in behind it. Same amount, every time. If you don't give it a door, it will take 1 out of the wall, and then you'll be standing in a lot of wheat looking at a lot of scrap." They put a ladder up and cleaned 2 nests out of the vents with a length of rebar, and the bins sighed when the second one came free. An actual sound, a long, low breath out of the sky, and Faye Merrick never forgot it. She joined at 22. Nell drove her to the bus and did not get out of the truck. "I taught you that for the lambs," she said, and put it in reverse. There was a folder with her name on it that she had never appealed. 2 years back at the school, on a hot range with 14 shooters on the line, somebody had put a round downrange 20 seconds into a check fire. It had gone into a berm and hurt nothing, and the board that convened afterward wanted a name in a box, and the name they put in the box was hers. Because she had been in position 4, and position 4's rifle was warm, and the man in position 3 had a father who had commanded a brigade. She had sat in that room for 40 minutes and answered every question with yes ma'am and no explanation. Boyd Renner had been range control that day. Sergeant Major, retired 31 years in, and after the finding came down, he had walked out to her truck in the parking lot with his hat in his hand. "I'll write it," he said. "I was on the tower. I saw the line. I'll put my name on paper and mail it to whoever you want." "It's done," she said. "It's not done. It's just quiet." He'd looked at her a long moment, and then he'd taken something off his own collar, a small silver pin, crossed rifles in a wreath, an old pattern the school had stopped issuing before she was born. He'd pushed it into her hand. "That isn't a medal. It's a receipt. Somebody's already paid for it. You just carry it." She had asked whose. He had told her, and then he had not said anything else for a while. And she had understood that the conversation was over. The censure sat in her record where anybody could read it in 9 seconds and stop reading. Every unit she went to, it went first. She had never asked Boyd for the letter. 2 years, 4 moves, a phone she could have picked up any night of any of them. The pin she wore under her collar flap where nobody could see it. 3 days before any of it, Hatcher stood in the door of the operations tent with a coffee and told a story about her to 5 men, and she was close enough to hear it, and he knew she was. "They sent us an intern," he said. "Command needed a picture for the newsletter, so." He drank. "Don't let her carry anything heavy." Somebody laughed the way you laugh when the senior man is talking. Somebody else didn't. Faye kept walking with a case of match ammunition on her shoulder, lot number stenciled on the side in white, and put it on her cot and opened it and counted it and wrote the lot in her book because she had been shooting a different lot for 11 days, and the difference between lots at 800 meters is the difference between a hit and a story. That afternoon, she and Reuben Cass spent 2 hours proving the rangefinder was lying. It was Cass's idea, and it turned into hers by the 3rd measurement. There was a water tower on the far side of the flats that the map said was 1,140 meters from the northeast corner of the pens, and the handheld kept giving them 1,181 over and over, with a consistency that was more suspicious than an error. "It's the haze," Cass said. "It's the glass," she said. "It's picking up the fence line behind it. Turn around and shoot the fuel bladder." They shot the fuel bladder. The number was right. They shot the tower again, from 4 meters left, where the fence dropped out of the beam path, and the number came back 1142. Cass sat back on his heels in the dust and looked at her with the specific pleasure of a man who has found somebody who will do the boring part. 2 years I've been holding for a number that was 40 meters wrong. 2 years you've been missing low and blaming yourself. That's the one, he said. That's exactly the one. By evening, the wind had come up the way it did every evening, and she was sitting on the chute rail with a plate on her knee, and Theo Blount was arguing with Hollis Greer about whether you could call wind off the plastic bags caught in the perimeter wire. "You can't," Greer said. "Bag's a bag." "Bag's an instrument," Faye said. "Bag hangs straight down, that's nothing. Bag out at 45, that's about 9 miles an hour, and if it's snapping at the corner, it's gusting, and you wait." She pointed with her fork. "That one's lying to you, though. It's in the lee of the guard tower. Never trust an instrument standing behind a building." "Where'd you learn that?" Blount said. "Coyotes." "Coyotes taught you." "My mother taught me. The coyotes graded me." She ate. "Failed me a lot. One of them took a lamb out of the pen 40 feet from where I was lying, and I swear he looked at me on the way out." Greer laughed so hard he had to put his plate down, and Cass was grinning into his coffee, and for about 10 minutes at the north fence of Camp Ardent, nobody in that little circle remembered the folder or the newsletter or any of it. Dale Cobb came out every 3rd week to service the generators and the water plant. He was a civilian, 51, from a company nobody could name, and he had been doing this in one country or another for 19 years, which meant he had opinions about soldiers and kept all of them to himself. The dust squall came in from the west while they were loading a flatbed, and the tarp over the pallets got a corner free and started flogging like something alive. And 4 men grabbed at it and made it worse, because that is what 4 men do. Faye came around the tailgate, took one look, and did 3 things. She walked to the upwind corner and put her boot on the loose edge, killing it. She ran the strap she was holding under the ratchet on the far rail and took the slack out with 2 pulls. Then she moved to the middle, laid her forearm flat across the belly of the sheet where the wind was getting under it, and held it for 4 seconds until Greer got the second ratchet and stepped back, and the whole thing sat down and went quiet. Cobb stood there with a filter wrench in his hand. It bothered him for the rest of the day, and he could not have explained why. It wasn't strength, it wasn't speed. It was that she had not tried anything twice. Every other man on that truck had done 4 things that didn't work before they did one that did, and she had done 3 things and stopped. And Cobb, who spent his life around machinery that told the truth, had the feeling of watching a good pump run. "Wind gets under a sheet once," she said, walking past him, "and it's gone. It's not the wind that beats you. It's the one place you let it in." "Sure," Cobb said, and thought about it while he ate and while he shaved, and at 2 in the morning, when he woke up for no reason at all. Thursday, at 20 past 10 in the morning, the operations sergeant came across the yard at a dead run. He came all the way to the chute, where she was sitting with her data book open and a pencil in her teeth. And he was a big man, and he was making a sound in his throat from the 200 meters he'd just covered in body armor. "Moran," he got out. "Scale House." She was already closing the book. 12 had gone out that morning with the seed convoy, 8 from the task force and 4 drivers, running the last load up the rail spur to the old grain terminal because the harvest was coming and the terminal was reopening for the first time in 9 years. The militia had put a charge in the culvert at kilometer 11 behind them, which meant the road was shut behind them, and then they had opened up on the scale house from the head house roof and from the shelter belt on both flanks, which meant the road was shut in front of them too. 2 were killed at the gate in the first 90 seconds. The rest went where anybody would go, into the only hard cover in 11 square kilometers of scrubland, which was the concrete reclaim tunnel that ran under the row of steel bins with a slide gate every 20 feet and 1 opening at each end. 10 in the tunnel, the operations sergeant said. 10. Ford's got them. He says they're fine on ammunition and short on everything else, and the far end's under fire. Faye stood up and looked north. At nothing, at the flat white sky over 16 kilometers of steppe. 10, she said. Rear Admiral Everett Shaw commanded the Joint Task Force out of a converted sail barn with a plywood floor, and he had been staring at a map for 4 minutes when they brought her in. He was 56 years old and had spent 32 of those years being told what his own instincts were worth. The relief force was stopped at the blown culvert and would be stopped there for 2 hours minimum. Aviation was 90 minutes out and weathered by a dust layer at 4,000 feet, and the only ground he had that could see the terminal from outside the militia's cordon was a rail embankment on the southeast, which was a 4-man problem, and every 4-man team he had was either at the culvert or 11 days into a rotation on the eastern border, except one. Shaw looked at her. He had signed the paper in March that kept her off the mission list. He remembered signing it. He remembered exactly how long he had spent reading the file before he signed, and it had been about 9 seconds, and the 9 seconds had been spent on a paragraph about a board finding 2 years old. And then he had done what he had been doing since he was 30, which was let a piece of paper stand in for a person. "Sergeant Merrick," he said, "I read 1 page of your record in March and made up my mind on it, and I put that in writing. That was mine. Nobody made me do it." He put 2 fingers on the map on a hatched line southeast of the terminal. "There is a rail embankment here. It is the only ground that looks down into that yard from outside their ring. I want you on it, and I want you on it before noon, and I am not going to pretend to you that I have a second choice." "Understood, sir." 10 people, Sergeant." "Yes, sir. 10. 14 minutes later, the truck was rolling out the north gate with Cass driving and Greer on the radio and Blount holding the guns down in the bed, and the first thing anybody at Camp Ardent heard from her came through the speaker in the operations barn in a voice with absolutely nothing in it. "Rampart longbow, moving, 4 up, ETA 35, Say last known posture of the tunnel element. In the barn, a staff sergeant who had called her the intern's assistant on Monday put his coffee down and did not pick it up again. They came off the road 2 kilometers short and drove the last stretch in the bottom of a dry cut with the truck's roof below the level of the scrub, and when the cut ran out, they walked. The steppe in August is not sand. It is old grass, burned white, and gravel and low thorn, and the ground gives back the heat it has been storing since May, so that the air over it moves like water over a stove. Faye went up the back of the rail embankment on her belly with the rifle cradled in her elbows and 40 pounds of everything else on her back, and the ballast rock was hot enough through her sleeves to make her think about it. The terminal came up over the lip in pieces. First the head house. 10 stories of gray concrete with a rusted leg tower and a conveyor gallery running off it like a bridge to nowhere. Then the old concrete silos, 6 of them in a row, joined at the shoulder. Then the newer bins, 4 of them, corrugated steel the color of a nickel, 62 feet tall and 48 across, standing on their concrete pads in a line east of the silos with the loading gallery over them. Then the rail spur, and the scale house, and the 2 burning trucks at the gate, and the shelter belt of dying elms along the north fence where the muzzle flashes were. 8:40 to the base of bin 4, Blount said, behind the spotter's scope. 9:10 to the headhouse roof. Winds, he looked at the dust. Wind's doing 4 things. Wind's doing 1 thing, Faye said. It's coming across the belt and dropping into the yard and running out through the gap by the scale house. That's why the dust in the yard's going the wrong way. Don't read the yard. Read the flags on the fence at 900 and read this grass right here and hold for what's here, because the first 400 meters are mine and the last 400 are the yard's. How do you know it's the last 400? Because I've been lying on it for 6 minutes. She was on the net with Ellis Ford by then. Ford was a staff sergeant with a voice like a screen door, and he had 10 people spread down 80 feet of concrete tunnel under 1,000,000 pounds of wheat. "Longbow, we're all right east of Gate 3, Ford said. "West opening's got 2 of them working toward it. There's a spout come off the bin above us, and I got wheat coming through the ceiling grate, which is a new one on me." Say again the wheat. "Wheat's coming in, not much. It's coming out of a hole in the bin somewhere and running along and coming down the grate." Faye lifted her eye off the glass for 1 second and then put it back. "Understood. Stay east. Do not move to the west opening. I'm going to work the roof first." The roof was the immediate problem. There was a machine gun on the head house, up 10 stories, firing down into the yard so that nobody in the tunnel could put a head out of either end, and it was in a corner where the parapet was double thick. She took 11 minutes on it. That is not a dramatic number. It is what it takes. She built a position. She got the bipod feet onto flat ballast so they wouldn't skate. She dry-fired twice on a rock at the same range to feel the rifle move. And she read the flags on the north fence for 8 of those 11 minutes without touching the trigger, while Blount got quieter and quieter beside her. 9:10, she said. "Hold 3/4 left. Watch for the swing." The gun on the headhouse stopped firing in the middle of a burst. 2 minutes later it started again, from a different corner, and she moved with it, and after the second time it did not start again at all. "That's 2, Greer said from the radio 20 meters back down the reverse slope in the shade of the embankment. "Ford says the west end's easier." That was when the technical came up the spur road. It was a pickup with a heavy gun in the bed, and it came in behind the scale house, and someone in it was smart because it did not come out into the yard. It swung wide, drove east along the outside of the fence, and put itself where it could see the whole southeast face of the embankment. The first burst went over. The second did not. There is a particular sound a heavy round makes going into rail ballast, which is not a crack and not a thud, but a kind of shattering, and the fragments of the rock come up as fast as anything else and go through cloth. Faye had her cheek on the stock when the world turned into gravel. She felt 3 pieces hit her plate carrier, and 1 hit the back of her hand and 1 go past her ear so close that her ear rang for a week afterward. The stones were coming up in a line, walking left to right along the crest, and she could hear the gun itself arriving a full second and a half after each burst, which meant it was 1,100 meters out and did not know exactly where she was, which meant it would find her by walking. She did not move. Moving was what he wanted. She lay with her face in the hot rock and her hands over the objective lens because a scratched lens ends the day, and she counted the walk, and it went past her and out to the right and stopped, and there were 4 seconds of nothing but the ringing and Blount saying a word over and over into the dirt beside her. "Theo, look at me." He looked. His eyes were doing what eyes do. "He's going to come back left. When he does, he's going to be flat to us for about 6 seconds. I need the wind at 1100, and I need it now, not perfect. Full value, left, 8, maybe 9. 8. She rolled 2 mils of wind on and let the crosshair sit in the empty space beside the truck's mirror and waited for the walk to come back. And when it came back, she let the rifle fire on the exhale like it was the least interesting thing that had ever happened. The gun in the truck bed stopped. The truck rolled forward another 12 feet on its own and put its nose in the fence. "Okay," Blount said. His voice cracked in the middle of the word. "Okay, okay." Faye reached over without looking and put her hand flat on the back of his neck for 2 seconds and then took it away. "Longbow, Rampart." Shaw's voice. "Relief is still 2 hours. Say your status." "Rampart, Longbow. Position is compromised, holding it anyway. 10 in the tunnel." 10, Shaw said. At 12:40, the shelter belt got organized. 6 or 7 of them started moving down the fence line toward the east end of the bins, using the elms and the fallen fence, and she killed the first attempt at the culvert crossing, and then they got wiser and started using the concrete silos, going bin to bin out of her angle. She called Ford to tell him, "Anvil, Longbow, 4 or more moving your east end along the silo bases. Do you copy?" Nothing. "Anvil, Longbow, how copy?" The radio hissed at her. On the step in the middle of the day, there is a sound the wind makes coming through dry grass that is very close to the sound a radio makes when nobody is talking, and for about 90 seconds she could not tell the two of them apart. She said his name 4 more times. She heard Greer behind her say, "Come on, man, come on," in a voice about an octave up from his normal one. She was aware, in a distant way she would think about later, that her thumb had gone white on the transmit bar and that her mouth had gone completely dry and that she was seeing her mother's kitchen for some reason, the yellow formica, the radio on the sill, which was not useful and would not leave. 10 was the number. 10 was the number she had said out loud to an admiral. "Longbow, Anvil." Ford, breathing hard, and behind him a lot of noise in a concrete space. "Say again, all after moving. 4 or more, your east end, on the silo bases." "Yeah," Ford said. "We know." Then, 30 seconds later, in a different voice, "Longbow, we're 9. She wrote it in the corner of her data book with a pencil, because that is what you do with numbers. 9. At 12:55, something went into the side of bin 4. She did not see the launch. She saw the strike, a gray-white bloom low on the near side of the steel, about 8 feet off the pad, and she saw the sheet go in and come back out, and then she saw the thing that made her stomach drop, which was a column of dust and grain coming out of the hole in a solid rope, the way water comes out of a broken main. "They're trying to blow the tunnel," Blount said. "They're not. They missed. They were shooting at the gallery." She was already counting. "Theo, watch the 4th ring." "The what?" "The corrugated. Count the rings up from the pad. Watch 4 and 5. She watched them herself while the rope of grain ran out onto the pad and spread and kept running. 900 tons of last year's wheat, sitting in a sealed steel can 62 feet tall, with a hole in the bottom of it. It took 4 minutes. Then the 4th ring on the near side of bin 4 dimpled inward between 2 stiffeners, a shallow dish about the size of a car door, and the sheet made a sound she couldn't hear at 840 meters, but that she knew exactly. A bang like a sheet of tin being flexed by a giant. "That's not the shooting doing that," Blount said. "No." "What's doing that?" "They fumigated it," Faye said, and her voice came out strange enough that Blount looked at her. 3 weeks ago, the terminal was coming back online for the harvest. The brief said they sealed and fumigated the bins. Look at the roof." He looked at the roof. On the cone of bin 4, 4 gooseneck vents and a center fill hatch, and over each one a taut skin of white poly sheeting lashed down with rope, gone gray with dust, standing out from the galvanized like scar tissue. "It's shut," Fay said. "Top to bottom, 900 tons is leaving out a hole in the bottom, and there is nothing coming in behind it." She keyed the radio. "Anvil, Longbow, where exactly are you in that tunnel?" "East of Gate 3, why?" "How far east?" 20, 30 feet. "Gate 4's shut and I can't move it. The actuator's dead." "Ford, bin 4 is directly over Gate 3 and it is going to come in. Not the grain, the bin. The whole can, and everything in it, onto the tunnel roof and the east opening. And when it does, you are in a concrete pipe with both ends shut." There was a long pause on the net. "How long?" Ford said. She watched the 5th ring start to go. "Not long." They found Wes Latham at 120 in the shelter belt on the near side, 300 meters short of the fence, and it was Cass who found him because Cass had gone forward to look at the culvert crossing. He was a truck commander, 34 years old, and he had been thrown off the road at the gate in the first 30 seconds and had crawled a quarter-mile with a hole through the outside of his thigh and had gotten himself under an elm and had passed out with his rifle across his chest and his radio in the truck he no longer had. They dragged him up the back of the embankment on a poncho. Fay came off the gun for 6 minutes. The hands that had been doing one thing all day now did another. She cut the trouser leg with a pair of shears, not a knife, because shears are faster and don't go where you don't want. She packed the wound with both thumbs, hard, harder than looked kind, until Latham's whole body went rigid and he made a noise into Cass's forearm. She put a windlass on above it and wrote the time on his forehead with a grease pencil in numbers big enough to read from 3 feet, and then she taped his hand to his chest so he'd stop reaching for the leg. "Am I going to live?" Latham said. People ask it in a certain way. She had heard it twice before. "Yes," she said. "The artery's not cut. If it were cut, you'd have died in the elms. Your leg's going to be ugly, and you're going to be here another 2 hours because the road's shut, and then you're going to be on a table tonight. That's the whole thing." Latham lay back and breathed at the sky for a while. "There's a letter in my footlocker," he said, "from my brother, Marty. He wrote me in April, and I never answered it." "Why not?" "Because it was 4 pages, and the first page was about our dad's funeral, and I got to the bottom of page 1, and I put it back in the envelope." He laughed, and it turned into something else halfway, and he stopped it. 11 months we haven't talked. Over a truck and a chair, and who said what at the wake? A chair. "You're going to answer it," Fay said. "Yeah? You're going to answer it because you're going to be lying on your back for 6 weeks with nothing else to do, and because you're going to be so bored by week 2 that you'll write to people you don't even like." She taped the last piece down and patted his shoulder twice. 4 pages. He wrote 4 pages. Nobody writes 4 pages to somebody they're done with. Latham put his forearm over his eyes. "You're a mean woman," he said, "and I like you. Drink water. Slow." Bo Hatcher was at the culvert with the relief force 11 kilometers away, lying on the hood of a stalled vehicle with a spotting scope, looking at a terminal he could see and could not touch. He had the longer gun. He had the better ammunition. He had 14 years and a wall of certificates and everybody's respect, including his own. And he had, from his side, a view of the head house and the west face of the silos and precisely nothing of the roofs of the steel bins because the conveyor gallery ran across his line at exactly the wrong angle, and there was no place within 4 kilometers where that changed. He watched the near sheet of bin 4 dish inward and heard through the scope's little glass world nothing at all, which was worse. The net was busy. Command was talking to aviation. Somebody was arguing about the culvert. Hatcher lay on the hood with his thumb on the transmit bar and did not press it, and a specialist next to him counted the seconds without meaning to, and it went 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. "Rampart, this is Hatcher." His voice came out wrong, and he cleared his throat and started again. "Rampart, Hatcher, I need Merrick." "Say again for Longbow?" "I need Merrick." Louder now, because the only way through was through. "There is one position on this ground that can see the tops of those bins, and she's lying on it. I can't see the roof from here, and I'm not going to be able to see it from anywhere I can get to today. Bin 4 is going to come down on that tunnel, and there are 9 people under it. A pause, and everybody on that net heard him breathe. "Merrick, this is Hatcher. It's yours. Whatever you need from me, ask." At Camp Ardent, in the operations barn, nobody said anything at all. Shaw stood up. On the embankment, Greer lowered the handset and looked at her with his mouth slightly open. Faye did not look back at him. She was already rearranging the roof. "Longbow copies," she said. "Give me 60 seconds." She said the whole thing out loud once because Blount had to run the glass for her and because Latham was 3 feet away and because saying it made it true. "Listen, a bin doesn't burst when you empty it. It caves. Grain goes out the bottom, and the same volume of air has to come in the top, and if it can't, the outside air pushes the walls in. That's all that's happening down there. 900 tons is running out a hole, and the top of that can is taped shut like a drum. So we can't stop the grain," Blount said. "We can't stop the grain. We don't need to. We need to let it breathe. You want to shoot holes in a steel roof? No, a bullet hole in that roof is the size of a pencil, and I could put 40 of them up there and it wouldn't matter." She reached over and tapped the poly on the near vent in his scope's picture. "That's what I'm shooting. That's plastic sheet, stretched over the vent throat and roped down, and right now it's pulled tight as a drumhead because the bin is sucking on it. A sheet under load tears from a hole. One puncture at the tightest point and the bin does the rest of the work itself. It'll pull its own gag off. I'm not making a hole. I'm making a tear and letting the pressure open it. And if you hit the steel instead, then I've made a pencil hole and wasted a round." She settled in. "Give me the near 2 goosenecks first. They're the ones I can see the throat on. Nothing comes out of a shut box for free. Give it a door. 880 to the roof, uphill of the base by 60 feet. A shallow cone seen almost edge-on from a rail embankment 40 meters above the yard, so that each vent presented not as a circle but as a thin gray ellipse the width of a thumbnail in the glass. Wind out of the west, 4 to 9, dropping into the yard, but she was not holding for the yard. She was holding for 800 meters of open flat and the last 100 over hot concrete, and the mirage was running left to right like a river. She did the math on paper. It took 40 seconds and she did not rush it. The first round left at 1:41 in the afternoon. The thing nobody who has not done it understands is the weight. At that range, the bullet is in the air for a little over a second, and a second is not a long time in a kitchen, but lying behind a rifle with 9 people underneath the thing you are shooting at, a second is a room you have to walk all the way across. She held the scope steady through the recoil the way she had been taught by nobody but herself. 10,000 repetitions on a dirt bank in a state with too much wind, and she watched the little gray ellipse, and it did nothing. It did nothing for what felt like the length of a song. It did nothing. Then the poly over the near gooseneck twitched, one flick like a horse's flank, and a black line appeared across it, and the line got wider, and the whole sheet peeled backward off the throat, and stood straight up in the wind and flogged there, tearing itself along the rope line. "Oh," Blount said. "Oh, it's opening. It's opening. Second one, left 12 feet, same elevation." The second sheet took 2 rounds. The first went through the middle and did nothing because the middle was slack, and she corrected without a word and put the next one at the base of the throat where the plastic was drummed tight over the metal lip and it split like it had been unzipped. "Fifth ring's still going in," Latham said from the poncho, watching with his head up on his elbow. He was right. She could see it. 2 vents was not enough. The hole in the sidewall had torn wider under the running grain, and the flow had gone from a rope to a curtain, and the bin was asking for more air than 2 goosenecks could hand it. "The other 2 are behind the peak," Blount said. "You can't see them. There's no angle." "I know. There's nothing else up there. There's the fill hatch." He found it. Dead center of the cone, at the peak, a meter-wide steel cap with the poly sheet drawn over it and lashed down in 4 places, and because it sat at the very top of the cone, and because she was looking almost along the roof's slope, it presented as a line, not a target, a pencil stroke. "That's edge on," Blount said. "There's no face on it." "Not right now, there isn't." She lay there with her cheek welded to the stock and did nothing, and the seconds went by, and every one of them cost something, and Blount opened his mouth twice and closed it twice. Because here is what the wind does on the step in the afternoon. It comes across in gusts with a shape to them, and when a gust crosses a roof it lifts, and a sheet of poly lashed at four corners over a raised cap will belly up in the lift like a lung for about a second and a half once every 40 or 50 seconds, and in that second and a half it stops being a line and becomes a face. "There," she said, and did not fire. "The bullet takes a second to get there. You do not shoot when you see it. You shoot when you can see the one after it coming." She watched 3 of them go by. She watched the plastic bags on the north fence, 900 meters away, come up to 45 degrees and start to snap. She watched the dust lift off the loading pad in a line moving toward the bins at the speed of a man jogging. She put the crosshair on empty sky above a strip of gray plastic and waited for the 5th ring to make the noise she couldn't hear. The gust came across the fence, and off the pad, and up the cone. The sheet bellied. She fired into where it was going to be. And then the second, the long, stupid, unbearable second, with the rifle back down and the ellipse in the glass and nothing happening. The plastic still up, the roof still shut, the 5th ring still going in, and Fay Merrick lying on hot ballast in the middle of the afternoon, with her mouth open thinking she had missed, and there would not be time for another. The sheet blew off the top of bin 4 like a hat. It went up 40 feet, turning, catching the light, and the roof of the bin let go a breath you could see. A gray column of dust standing up out of the open hatch and leaning off to the east, and the 5th ring came back out, not all at once. It came out in stages, 3 shallow bangs of steel finding its shape again, and the dish in the 4th ring shrank and became just a mark on a wall. "It's out," Blount said. It came out. It came back out. She did not stop. That is the part people leave out afterward. She lay there for 19 more minutes while 900 tons of wheat ran out of a hole in the bottom of that bin, and the dust of it hung over the whole yard like a fog, and twice the poly on the second gooseneck flapped back down over the throat and started to seal itself, and twice she shot it off again. And once the fill hatch skin caught on the lip, and she put a round through it at 880 meters that no one clapped for. Holding a thing together is not one moment. It is a series of small, ordinary refusals to let it go. At 2:03, the grain inside dropped to the level of the tear in the sidewall, and the flow slackened and stopped on its own, and the bin stood there in the dust, ugly, dented, and up. "Rampart longbow." Her voice was completely flat. "Bin 4 is vented. Structure is stable. Recommend the tunnel element stays east until I say." There was a silence on the net. "Rampart copies," said the operations sergeant, and then, off the switch but not off it far enough, "She says structure is stable." Her hands started shaking about 90 seconds after that, which is roughly the normal delay. She put the rifle down and pushed both palms flat on the ballast until they stopped, and then she rolled onto her back for 4 seconds and looked at the white sky and let her chest do what it wanted, and then she rolled back over. Greer was crying without any sound, still holding the handset up by his ear like it might say something else. Getting 9 people out of a concrete tunnel across 400 meters of open loading yard is not something a rifle does. It took the rest of the afternoon. The relief force cleared the culvert at 3:40 and came up the spur, and the militia in the shelter belt broke into 2 groups, and one of them ran, and one of them didn't. 11 of them had been on the ground at Moran that morning. 9 did not leave it. At 4:15, with the west end still taking fire from the silo tops, Hollis Greer took the empty water bowser they had brought for nobody's reason and drove it 300 meters down the loading lane at 19 miles an hour and parked it broadside across the mouth of the tunnels so that 9 people had 11 feet of steel and 400 gallons of water between them and the silos while they crossed. He took a round through the shoulder doing it and kept his foot on the pedal until the truck was where it needed to be, and Cass pulled him out of the cab from the passenger side, and neither of them ever described any of it in a way that made it sound like anything. Fay came down off the embankment at 4:30 with the rifle across her back and got into the yard on foot. The last 300 meters was open pad, and she covered it in bounds of 20 and 30 meters with dust coming up around her boots in little rips, and the sound of rounds going past over open concrete is a flat snap with no echo in front of it and a long echo behind, and she remembers thinking, at one point, lying flat behind a wheel chock 9 inches high, that the concrete under her cheek smelled exactly like the floor of the sale barn at home. She got to the tunnel. She helped carry Ellis Ford's radio operator out on a stretcher with her hands, one corner, walking backward, and then she went back in and got a man's rifle he had left because a man who leaves his rifle is not thinking. And then she stood in the mouth of the loading gallery at the corner of bin 4 and held that corner for 11 minutes while the vehicles went out, alone, with the last of the light coming sideways under the gallery roof and the wheat dust in it turning gold. She did not come out the way they did. When the last truck cleared the gate, she went east instead of south, down the drainage cut behind the bins and along the rail spur in the dark, on foot with a dead radio, and walked into the relief force's outer position at 6:50 at night from a direction nobody was watching, with her hands up and her name said loudly twice. The kid on the gun almost shot her. He talks about it to this day. Commander Iris Whitcomb arrived on the Tuesday with a folder, a legal pad, and 11 years of experience in rooms where people lied to her. She was not from the ground unit and did not want to be. She had a preliminary inquiry to run because 2 civilians had died at the terminal gate and because someone at a headquarters 400 miles away had noticed that the shooter of record had a 2-year-old adverse finding in her file, and that combination writes its own memo. Sergeant Merrick. Whitcomb had a corner of the sale barn with a folding table. I want to be direct with you. I've read your record and I've read the after action, and they don't describe the same person, and one of them is wrong. Yes, ma'am. You're 29. Yes, ma'am. Whitcomb looked at her for a second longer than was polite. It was the face. Everybody did it, and Faye had stopped noticing years ago. There is a finding here from a board at the marksmanship school. Unauthorized discharge during a check fire. You made no statement in your own defense, and you did not appeal. That's correct, ma'am. Why not? I didn't think it would go anywhere. Whitcomb wrote something. The after action states that you fired 6 rounds at a structure at a range of 880 meters for the purpose of ventilating it. I've been in this service a long time, and I have never read that sentence before. What I need to understand is whether that is an accurate account or whether it's a unit protecting somebody. It's accurate. Walk me through it. She walked her through it. It took 19 minutes, and she used a pen and the back of a ration box to draw the cone of the roof and the throat of the gooseneck, and the way a sheet under suction tears from a puncture. And Whitcomb, who had grown up in Ohio in a town with 2 elevators on the rail line, sat very still for the last 4 minutes of it. Then the evidence started coming in the door, which is what always happens if you sit in one place long enough. Blount brought the data book with the wind calls written in pencil in the margins with times beside them. Cass brought the rangefinder and made her stand in the doorway while he demonstrated what a fence line does to a laser return, because he had decided that mattered and would not be moved off it. A signals sergeant brought the recorded net traffic on a laptop, and Whitcomb listened to a woman's voice say, "Bin 4 is going to come in, not the grain, the bin," 4 minutes before anyone else on that net had understood there was a second problem at all. And at 11 o'clock, a sergeant first class named Bo Hatcher came in without being asked, stood at the end of the table, and put down 2 pages of handwriting. Ma'am, on the 17th, 3 days before, Sergeant Merrick told me and 5 other people that the Moran run would get hit at the scale house and gave her reasons. I told her to stay in her lane. I did not pass it up. That's my failure, and it's in there with my name on it. He was looking at the wall over Whitcomb's head. Also, on the 3rd of the month, I made a comment about her in the operations tent in front of the section that I'd like recorded, because I've heard it repeated 4 times since, and it's still going around, and it shouldn't be. Whitcomb picked up the pages. You understand this is not helpful to you? Yes, ma'am. Sergeant, this reads like a statement against your own interest. That's about right, Hatcher said, and left. Whitcomb closed the folder at 11:30. She looked at the drawing on the ration box for a while. Sergeant Merrick, I came here to find out whether the record was wrong about you. She capped her pen. It's wrong about you. The generators went off at midnight, and the whole camp got quiet enough to hear the fence. Faye was sitting on the edge of a cot in the aid tent with her boots off, and Wes Latham was on the cot with his leg in an external frame, and 11 hours to go before the aircraft, and neither of them was sleeping. You want to know something stupid, Latham said. Yes. The chair. In my dad's house. The one Marty and I had the fight about? It's a green recliner with a cigarette burn in the arm, and my father sat in it for 26 years, and neither of us wants it. Neither of us. We just both couldn't stand the other one throwing it out. That's not stupid. It's a chair, Merrick. It's not a chair, though, is it? He was quiet. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. When you were up there this afternoon and you were waiting on that wind, what were you thinking about? Faye looked at her hands. My mother's kitchen. Your mother's kitchen. Yellow counters. There's a radio on the windowsill she's had since before I was born. It came in when I was on the net trying to get Ford, and I couldn't get rid of it. She rubbed her eyes with the heels of her hands. I've never told anybody that. It's not. People think it's all numbers up there. It is numbers. But there's a whole other room going on the whole time, and you can't lock the door. Yeah, there's another thing. Go ahead. She took the pin out of her collar flap and held it in the light of the one bulb, crossed rifles in a wreath, the silver gone soft, a bite out of the edge of the wreath where something had taken a piece of it. This isn't mine. A man gave it to me 2 years ago, the day a board decided I did something I didn't do. It belonged to somebody before him, a shooter named Wade Ellison. She turned it over. He scratched his service number into the back of it with a nail, apparently, because that's what they did. Ellison's the reason there's a whole way of doing this job. He stayed on a ridge in another country in another war so 11 men could come off it, and they never found him. He's still up there. That's the whole story. And you wear it? I wear it inside my collar, she said, so nobody can see it. Because I'm not sure I have any right to it, Wes. He held a ridge. I shot some plastic off a roof. Latham laughed out loud once, and then swore because laughing moved his leg. Say that again. Don't. No, say it again, out loud, so you can hear it. He waited. She didn't. You want me to tell you what my 9 looked like from underneath? We were in a concrete pipe with the far end shut and the near end covered, and there was wheat coming down through the grate on my head, and Ford had stopped talking, which was the worst part, because Ford talks. And then a voice comes up on the net and says, "Stay east," and it says it like it's telling us where the coffee is. He shifted, breathing through it. You held a ridge. It just happened to be a rail embankment, and it happened to be Thursday. The pin's yours. He'd have handed it to you himself and been rude about it. Faye sat there with it in her palm. Put it on the outside, Latham said. That's all I'm saying. She got the satellite phone from the morale tent on Thursday morning, 9 days after, and sat on an ammunition crate behind the tent where nobody went, and dialed a number in another hemisphere that she had known by heart for 2 years and had never once dialed. It rang 4 times. It was late evening there. Renner. Sergeant Major, it's Faye Merrick. There was a pause with a whole room in it, a television going off, a chair. Well, Boyd Renner said, look at that. I'm sorry to call your house. Don't do that. Don't start there. She heard him sit down. You all right? I'm all right. The wind moved the flap of the morale tent. I'm calling to ask you for something, and I want to say up front that I know how long it took me. Ask. That statement, about the range, about the line and where the round came from and what you saw from the tower. She had to stop and start again. If you'd still write it, I'd like to send it up. There's an officer here running an inquiry, and she's asked me twice why there's a finding in my record, and I've got nothing to hand her but my word. Boyd Renner did not answer for a moment. Faye, he said, it's been typed since the 22nd of March, 2 years ago. It's in a manila envelope in my desk drawer in the range shack with your name on the front and a stamp already on it. I put the stamp on it so that the day you called I wouldn't have an excuse to wait. She opened her mouth and nothing came out. I've walked past that drawer, I don't know, 600 times. Why didn't you just send it? She said, and her voice went, all at once, on the word send. It went, and it did not come back for a while. She sat on an ammunition crate behind a tent on the step, with her hand over her eyes and her shoulders going, and made almost no noise at all, because she had learned to cry the way you learn anything, which is by practicing it somewhere nobody comes. Because it wasn't mine to send. Boyd said gently. You'd have hated me. A man who fixes your life without asking you is just another man deciding things about you, and you'd had a bellyful of that by then. He waited. He was patient in the way of a person who has spent 30 years next to loud noises. I'd have waited another 2. It was going in the mail either way, girl. It was just going to be a question of whether I mailed it or my widow did. Don't say that. I'm 56 and I eat like a bachelor. Somebody's got to say it. He blew his nose, unashamed, right into the phone. Anyway, it goes out tomorrow, registered, and I'll call the school and get my name on the endorsement, and I'll call Corley, because Corley was on the tower with me, and he's been sick about it for 2 years and hasn't got the spine to say so unless somebody goes first. Thank you. You want to know the funny part, Boyd said. The reason I gave you that pin that day, I've never told you. Tell me. Because you didn't argue. He let that sit. You sat in that room and took it, and you didn't argue. And I thought, well, that is the exact wrong thing to do, and it is also exactly what he'd have done, and Lord help us both. A long breath. How's it doing? She looked at it, pinned now to the outside of her collar where anybody could see it. It's out in the weather, she said. Bo Hatcher found her at the wash rack on a Sunday evening with a rifle broken down on a folded poncho, and stood there long enough that she finally looked up. That thing with the wind. He gestured vaguely at the sky. Off the bags on the wire, that's real? It's real. Huh? He crouched down on his heels, which put him lower than her, and she was fairly sure he had never done that in front of another person in his life. I owe you something, and I've been standing over there for about 10 minutes putting it in the right order, and it keeps coming out wrong, so I'm just going to say it badly. Okay. I called you the intern in front of 5 men. I said, don't let her carry anything heavy. His jaw worked. It wasn't, I want to say it was a joke, and it wasn't a joke. It was me making sure the room knew where you stood before you could show them, because if you showed them, then I'd have to... He stopped. He started again. There's a thing I've never said out loud. In March, when you shot that plate first light with Aiden's gun, and you asked me what the 0 was, and I said whatever's on it, I was hoping you'd miss. He looked at the ground. I've been doing this 14 years. I've been the best shooter in every unit I've been in since I was 24, and it isn't a thing I do, it's the thing I am. And then a sergeant shows up who looks like somebody's kid sister and calls the wind off a plastic bag. He shook his head. That's mine. That's a small thing to be, and I've been being it since March, and 9 people damn near paid for it. Faye put the bolt down on the poncho. So, I'm sorry. Not for all of it. For the tent, for the 17th, for the whole thing. Silence has a length, and this one was about 4 seconds. Heard, she said. Sit down. He sat down. She handed him a patch, and the 2 of them cleaned the rifle without talking. And after a while, Hatcher started explaining something about a lot of ammunition he had been fighting with all summer, and she made him get his data book, and they were still at it when the lights went off. The call came through the morale line on a Wednesday afternoon. Is this Sergeant Merrick? Faye Merrick? Yes, ma'am. My name is Marjorie Ford. I'm Ellis's wife. She was crying already, and she had clearly promised herself she wouldn't. I'm sorry. I sound like a crazy person. I've been trying to get through since Monday, and they keep giving me a different number. You got me. It's all right. I don't know how any of it works. He can't tell me anything. He says he can't tell me anything, and I don't care about the... She made a sound. I just wanted to say. We have a house. It's a greenhouse on a corner, and the driveway's got a crack in it he's been meaning to seal for 3 summers. And he's going to be home in November, and he's going to be standing in that driveway complaining about it. And I've been sitting in this house for 9 days, understanding that that was almost not a thing that was ever going to happen. Ma'am, I'm a school secretary. I don't have anything to give you. I don't have any words that are the right size. Marjorie Ford stopped and gathered herself and said very clearly, you gave me back my whole life. That's what happened. I don't know what you did, and I'm never going to understand it, and it doesn't matter. You gave me back my whole life, and I'm going to be thinking about you for the rest of it. Faye stood in the plywood booth with the handset against her ear. Nothing in her training had covered this. There was no correct reply. She heard herself say, he's a good sergeant, which was true and was nothing, and Marjorie Ford laughed wetly and said, oh, he's not. He's a nightmare. He leaves cups everywhere. And then both of them were laughing, and one of them was still crying, and Faye leaned her forehead against the plywood and let it happen. "Will you come to dinner?" Marjorie said. "When you're back. Any time. I'm serious. I'll drive." "Yes, ma'am." "Say you will. People say yes and then they don't." "I'll come to dinner." The hangar at Camp Ardent held 400 people, and on the last Friday of the month it held 411, standing in a heat that came up off the concrete floor and sat on everybody's shoulders. The awards were nothing anybody would remember. 2 commendations for the culvert, a citation for Hollis Greer, read out while he stood there with his arm strapped across his front and his ears going red, and a noise from the back of the hangar that had to be stopped by a first sergeant. Then they called Sergeant Faye Merrick to the front and read out something with the word conspicuous in it, and Rear Admiral Everett Shaw stepped up with the case in his hand. He was reaching for her collar when he stopped. The hangar noticed it the way a room notices a skipped heartbeat, not all at once, in a wave from the front. Shaw's hand was 6 inches from her uniform and it was not moving, and he was looking at the small silver pin she wore on the outside of her collar, and something was happening to his face that 400 people watched at once without understanding. "Sergeant," his voice had gone strange. "May I see that?" She unpinned it and put it in his hand. Shaw turned it over, and he had to hold it further away and tilt it toward the hangar lights, because he was 56 and the numbers were scratched small. Nobody in that building would afterward agree on how long the silence lasted. The public affairs sergeant who had a recording said 41 seconds. 41 seconds in a metal building with 400 people in it, and the sounds available were the wind on the roof panels and a single aircraft turning somewhere out on the pad and 1 folding chair creaking in the 3rd row. "Where did you get this?" Shaw said. "A man gave it to me, sir. Boyd Renner. He was a spotter." "He was Ellison's spotter." "Yes, sir." Shaw closed his hand around it and put his other hand on the edge of the podium and stood there with his head down. Then he lifted his head and spoke to the room, and he did not use the microphone. 32 years ago, I was a lieutenant, junior grade, attached to a Marine battalion as a liaison officer, and I was on a ridge above a river I am not going to name with a company that had stopped functioning as a company. There was one way down, and it was covered. He held the pin up between 2 fingers where nobody past the 4th row could possibly see it, and it did not matter. A gunnery sergeant named Wade Ellison told our commander to start moving people, and that he would make it expensive. He stayed on that ridge with 1 other man and a radio. 11 of us came down. I was the 4th. His spotter came out that night. He did not. The public affairs sergeant's recording catches the exact moment the room stops breathing. There is a number scratched into the back of this pin with a nail. I have seen it before. I watched him do it with the tip of a bayonet in a hole in the ground because he said the school had spelled his name wrong on the paperwork and he was not going to lose the pin as well. Shaw's voice went and he waited for it and got it back. "We never recovered him. He is carried as missing. He has been missing since before this sergeant was born, and he has been standing on my shoulder for 32 years, and I have looked for that pin at every ceremony I have attended in 3 decades without ever admitting to myself that that was what I was doing." He turned to her. "In March, I read 1 page of your file and decided who you were. I want that said in this building, in front of these people, because I said the opposite of it in a room with a door on it." He put the pin back into her hand and folded her fingers over it. "You will wear this on the outside, Sergeant, and you will not be augmented, attached, or observed for the remainder of the time you are under my flag. You'll be assigned section leader, and I'll sign it Monday." In the 4th row, a warrant officer who had been in the service 22 years stood up. He did it alone, and he did it too early, before there was any signal for it. And for 1 full second he was the only person standing in a hangar of 400, which is a very long second and cost him something he never mentioned. Then the row behind him went, and then it came all at once from the back like weather, chairs going over, and the noise in that metal building was such that the aircraft on the pad throttled back to find out what was happening. Hatcher was standing on the aisle with his hands hanging at his sides, not clapping, just standing, looking at the floor with his jaw set. Marjorie Ford's husband, on crutches, could not clap and beat the crutch against the concrete instead. and in the middle of it, Fay Merrick stood almost still, with a small silver pin in her closed hand, and moved exactly twice. She looked up at the roof panels, once, and then she looked down. Dale Cobb came back with his tools on the second Tuesday of the following month and heard about it in the chow line, which is where everything is heard. He found her at the north fence in the evening, at the chute, with her boots on the bottom rail. "They tell me you shot the hat off a grain bin," he said. Something like that. 880 meters, give or take. Cobb set his coffee on the rail and looked out at the flats where the light was going. He had been trying to say this since March, and he had a 51-year-old man's vocabulary for machines and none at all for people. "I want to tell you what I saw," he said. "And it's not that. It's the tarp on the flatbed back before any of it. 4 fellas fighting a sheet in the wind. I remember. I've been doing this 19 years and I have watched about 1,000 people work." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn. "Most people, when a thing's going wrong, they get busy. That's what busy is. It's the noise a person makes while they're waiting for the problem to solve itself. You didn't get busy. You looked at it, and then you put your foot on the one corner that mattered, and it was over. That's not— Let me finish, because I've been carrying it around a while." He looked at her. "That's the whole thing. Everybody wants to know how you do the 880 meters. Nobody's going to ask about the tarp. But it's the same woman doing both, and the second one's the one that scared me." Fay didn't say anything. "That's all," Cobb said. "That's my speech. It took me 5 months. It was a good speech." "It was too long," he said, and picked up his coffee and went to bed. A year is a long time, and it does what it does. Boyd Renner's envelope went registered and got where it was going, and Corley found his spine after all, and in February a board that had never met her met about her for 19 minutes and struck the finding from the record, and a clerk in an office nobody will ever name typed the words "in error" and set in motion a small amount of paperwork that changed the whole shape of a career. Boyd retired properly the following spring and bought a boat that leaks and calls her on the first Sunday of the month and complains about it. Bo Hatcher took an instructor billet he could have avoided at a school where nobody is impressed by anybody, and he teaches a 2-hour block now on what a place does to you when it breaks: grain, fuel, concrete, water, cable, load, which is built almost entirely out of 2 pages a sergeant wrote in a plywood room on the step and gave him without conditions. He puts her name on the first slide. He has never once told her he does that. Theo Blount is at the same school, on the Wind, and has been told twice to stop bringing plastic bags into the classroom. Hollis Greer got out and drives a combine in September and a plow truck in the other season, in a county with 1 traffic light, and he is not sorry about any of it. Wes Latham walks with a limp that he says he can hide and cannot, and in the second week of August he sat on a porch in the middle of the country with his older brother while the sun went down. They got the recliner out of the house together. It took them 40 minutes because of the doorway and because both of them kept having to stop, and it sits now on Marty's screened porch with the burn in the arm and a stack of magazines on it, and neither of them will say a word about the 11 months. Marjorie Ford's driveway got sealed in April. Fay Merrick made it to that dinner, and to 2 more since. She was in a supermarket parking lot in the spring, 3 states from anywhere she knows, loading a case of water into the back of a rental car. A flatbed was tied down on the far side of the lot, and the wind got under the corner of the sheet, and the plastic came up and started to snap, that fast, hard sound, crack, 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 crack. She stopped with both hands on the case and did not put it down. It went on for about 20 seconds. She stood there in a parking lot in the sunshine with her heart going like something trying to get out and her eyes fixed on the tailgate in front of her, and she counted the way she counts, and when the man came out and threw a strap over the corner and it stopped, she put the case in the car and closed the hatch and sat in the driver's seat with the keys in her lap for 1.5 minutes before she started the engine. Her mother came out from the kitchen with a dish towel that August, when Fay was home for 11 days, and stood on the porch while her daughter unloaded the truck. "They finding him?" Nell said. It was the first time she had asked about any of it. They're looking. There's a recovery team, and there's a place on that ridge they've narrowed to about 400 meters, and there's a number on a pin and a rear admiral's affidavit and a service record that isn't a question mark anymore. Faye set the last bag down. It's slow. It's going to take years. But he's got a file with a location in it now instead of a blank, and he didn't have that before. Nell Merrick folded the towel in half and then in half again. "You taught me that," Faye said. "I taught you about coyotes. You taught me that nothing empties for free. Everything that goes out, something's got to come in behind it, and if you don't give it a door, it takes one." She looked at her mother. "That's the whole thing, Mom. That's the whole job. I've never once done anything that wasn't that." Her mother looked at the yard for a while. "Well," Nell said, "bring the cooler." There is a rotation that brings her back through Camp Ardent the following year, and on her last morning she walks up to the north fence in the dark before anybody is up, because the coffee is not on yet and there is nowhere else to go. The cattle chutes are still there. The boards still smell like 40 years of animals. Out past the wire, the flats are gray and then not gray, and away to the north, along the spur, the first train of the season is going down to the coast out of Moran with 61 cars of wheat on it, and the sound it makes arrives about 4 seconds after you can see it, low and long, like something breathing out. They are running 2 shifts at that terminal now. There are men working under bin 4 with a patch plate on the sidewall and a fresh coat of paint that does not match, and they are none of them thinking about any of it, which is exactly right. At a school 8,000 kilometers away, a room full of shooters is being told, this week and every week from now on, that the ground you are lying on will one day try to tell you something, and that the whole art is being quiet enough to hear it, and the name on the first slide is not the one anybody in that room expected. On a ridge in another country, a team with brushes and sifting screens is working a 400-meter box, slowly in the heat, and will be back next season and the season after. Faye Merrick puts her boot on the bottom rail of the loading chute at the north fence of Camp Ardent and watches the train go, with a small silver pin on the outside of her collar catching what light there is. Her bag is packed. Her hands are steady. The wind comes up off the step the way it does every morning at this hour, and she reads it without meaning to, the way you read a road sign in your own language. And then she picks up her rifle case and walks down toward the light in the mess hall window, level-eyed, in no hurry at all.